But when you enter a divorce or the death of a spouse into the equation, you introduce just a lot of upheaval, emotionally, financially. There's a lot of uncertainty. So there are more variables to deal with during that moment of the upheaval with the divorce or the spouse passing away. So we find that we need to do just a lot more triage.
My guest today is Maryann Keith, a certified financial planner with Baden Wealth Management, who works with single, divorced, and widowed women, specializing in holistic financial planning with an emphasis on Social Security and Medicare. Welcome to the show, Maryann.
Good morning. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show. One of the things that intrigued me about what you do is sort of the niche you work in talking to women, first of all, helping women, and in different situations in their life. So I guess my first question is, and what you do is, do single, divorced, and widowed women each have different needs when it comes to financial planning? And if so, what are they?
They sure do, Steve. So let's take a single woman. She's been single, could change in the future, but she's been single for a while. Her life is going to be a little bit more predictable.
Mm-hmm.
We know how much is coming in, how much is going out financially, and we have a plan because, her life has been fairly predictable to this point. But when you enter a divorce or the death of a spouse into the equation, you introduce just a lot of upheaval, emotionally, financially. There's a lot of uncertainty. So there are more variables to deal with during that moment of the upheaval with the divorce or the spouse passing away. So we find that we need to do just a lot more triage and taking care of immediate needs. If someone is single, they know where they live, they're planning to move. It's going to be on their own time frame. But if someone is going through a divorce, they may have to leave their home. They may have to move. A lot of things are changing with someone who's lost their spouse. They may also be concerned about whether or not they can stay in their home. And also you have the challenge of change in income because, some of these women sometimes that I work with, they didn't always necessarily work, or maybe they earned less than their spouse. So they're going from 2 incomes to 1 or 1 income to 0. So it presents a lot more difficult challenges when you have this unexpected event in your life happen.
Mm-hmm. So with that upheaval, like I said, for the death or divorce, with the home situation, with being able to deal with the mortgage, things like that, especially if the mortgage may be in the deceased spouse's name, where you have, there's a mortgage, but it's not in your name; it's in the dead spouse's name. Which raises an issue, and maybe we can talk about it. What is it that needs to be done in that situation? I mean, from a lawyer's perspective, I have an idea, but we're dealing with, the woman, the husband dies, maybe because she didn't work or he had a better credit rating or whatever, the mortgage was in his name. He's now gone. What does she need to do to address that?
So anytime, we work with someone who's had a recent loss, we sit down and we first start by doing an inventory, and we make sure that they've gone to see their estate planning attorney, because that's a very important first step, just to make sure we have someone on deck to handle all the legal issues. But you start with that inventory because you'll often find it's not just a house or a car. There are often accounts that maybe weren't titled jointly or didn't have a beneficiary. And we help with inventorying every single asset and the status of it and the action that needs to be taken. So in a lot of cases, you'll find that mortgages are jointly titled, but if the mortgage was not jointly titled, then that's where you bring in a loan officer. And, you also have to look at the titling of the house. So
Mhm.
we just do a lot of very detailed inventory work and help our clients come up with an action plan. And, of course, we're limited to the scope of financial advice. We can't do all the real estate and legal transactions, but we
Mhm.
act as their quarterback and their confidant, and just help them with that to-do list and make sure they're seeing all the professionals that they need to
Mhm.
take care of these difficult items, like a mortgage or a home title, for example.
Well, the home title or anything, and obviously this varies from state to state, and our listeners should, consult with an attorney in their state for the
Of
legal issue. But
course.
for the most part, if husband and wife, they're living in a home, if it's titled to both of them, then uh, title by operation of law goes to
Mhm.
the surviving spouse.
Then it's easy.
It's called joint tenancy by the entireties. So
Mhm.
it automatically goes to the spouse. But even if it's titled in just the name of the deceased spouse, uh, under intestacy statutes in probably most states, if not all,
Mhm.
everything goes to the surviving spouse, again by operation of law. So the
Mhm.
title issues, would you agree, are not? Yeah, they need to be worked out and maybe record a new
Mhm.
deed, although that's not necessarily needed. But it's more that from the financing end. Do you find that it's needed where the widow needs to refinance, or mortgage companies, just as long as the payments get made, they don't care? Or what? How do you advise widows in that situation?
So that's a really interesting topic. And we found that lenders are not necessarily as friendly to widowed women or divorced women in the refinance process if they don't have an earned income, if they're
Hmm.
not working. And we've found it to be very challenging sometimes to get a refinance for these women.
Hmm.
Oftentimes they're receiving, a substantial amount of life insurance assets, but sometimes the mortgage companies don't want to touch this case until the money's been seasoned for a few
Hmm.
years. So we've had to get creative with lenders. We've found ways to just, simply set up paying the client an income stream and showing that there's enough available for X amount of years. But
Hmm.
the refinance with women who don't currently have employment or earned income, it is a challenge. And it's very helpful to be working with a financial advisor that can help you bat around ideas with your lender to
Hmm.
try to make it happen.
Well, as the world has evolved and things have changed, I would think that more and more women are in the workforce. Have you found that to
Mhm.
be the case as far in dealing with widowed women, where the majority of them have a career, a job, or a stream of income? Or is it the other way around? Is it still most of them don't work?
Well, I think that perhaps my view is skewed because I get a lot of women coming to me that haven't worked. And I think
Hmm.
because they haven't worked and they haven't been involved in the finances as much, they're more likely to be reaching out to a financial advisor. I think with the younger generation, there are significantly more women in the workforce, and they may just wait a little bit longer to reach out to an advisor because they have more experience in
Hmm.
dealing with their finances.
Yeah, I mean, they're coming. I would think yes. If they're working, they have a stream of income, things like that. They're probably more able to just handle it themselves, or refinance it out of the husband's
Mhm.
name, and then just
Mhm.
move forward. But they're coming to you because they're not in that situation, and they need
Mhm.
your help. So this is something that you help widowed women do when they're in that situation, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So we've dealt with, uh, non-liquid assets that are in the name of the deceased spouse, and maybe be encumbered by something like a mortgage.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess there's also, in addition to the home, there's cars. The cars may have been
Mhm.
titled, even if they're not titled to the spouse. The financing was still in the name of the deceased spouse. So you're dealing with basically the same issue there, right?
Mhm. And in a lot of those cases, Steve, if
Hmm.
there's a car payment, if there's any type of big life insurance payoff. We just see a lot of people they just pay the car off and
Mhm.
just remove that from the equation. So it's one less thing to do.
So I guess that's it raises a good point of sort of preventative medicine.
Mhm.
Look, if we had, you know, in the situations you deal with, if you're able to go back in time to before the death, what would you
Mhm.
recommend to the two women? I mean, I have this podcast to help people with their personal finance so they don't end up coming to me for a bankruptcy.
Uh-huh.
I guess with you, how would you advise women? Say, look, this is what you need to do in order to avoid the problems I see with widowed women should your husband die. What sort of advice would you give in that situation?
Sure. So advice that we give to our clients, especially, couples that we work with, is we go through all their assets. We make sure that they have beneficiaries
Mm-hmm.
on all of their accounts. We make sure that all of their assets are jointly titled so that nobody loses access
Mm-hmm.
to something if someone were to pass. We make sure that they see an estate planning attorney, and that we follow up and implement any instructions and recommendations that estate planning attorney makes. And
Mm-hmm.
then we make sure that every few years that you're reviewing, that you're double checking your beneficiaries, you're updating them as
Mm-hmm.
needed.
Okay. All right. Are there any other issues? We've been talking specifically about widowed women. Before we
Mhm.
move on, are there any other issues you find that uh, women need to do from a financial planning standpoint should their spouses die?
Yeah, so let's talk about retirement accounts for a moment. So,
Okay.
I've worked with a lot of young women whose husbands sadly have passed away in their 40s and 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, one of the bigger assets is the retirement accounts, the
Mm-hmm.
401ks and the IRAs that they've accrued over their lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And what a lot of women don't know, and might not know unless they work with a planner or perhaps a CPA, is when they take those retirement accounts over, they have two options.
Mm-hmm.
They can title those retirement accounts in, their name alone, or they can set it up in an inherited status.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're under age 59 and a half, you absolutely want to make sure you title your retirement assets in the inherited status,
Mm-hmm.
because depending on your financial situation, you might need to tap into some of those retirement assets before
Mm-hmm.
59 and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have your retirement in those inherited status, then you are actually able to access your retirement accounts before 59 and a half without that additional 10% early withdrawal penalty.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be huge for someone. If you made the mistake of, being 45 years old and putting that IRA in your name alone, you can't touch it until after 59 and a half without that
Mm-hmm.
10% penalty. So that's a huge planning item that we make sure we cover. We of course hope that you won't need to touch those retirement assets until later, but we want to make sure that bucket is available for our clients should they need to tap into it.
All right. So you want to designate it as inherited so that
Mhm.
you can still get earlier access to it.
That's right.
But what about the reverse situation? Let's say, you're 45 or 50, you're a good
Mhm.
15 to 20 years away from retirement, your spouse dies, you now have an inherited IRA.
Mhm.
Now, I understand, and maybe it's different in this situation, but we're inherited IRAs, you inherit it, you need to take that money out within 10 years, over a 10-year period of time.
Mhm.
So if that's the case, then here you are, 45, 50 years old, you may need that for retirement, but you have to take all of it out before you retire.
There's
So,
actually an exemption for spouses, Steve.
oh,
So
okay.
spouses, they have an exemption. So they're not bound by that 10-year rule.
That makes sense.
That gives them
Yeah.
a lot more flexibility.
Okay. All right. So looking at the retirement accounts and things like that, and with pensions, I understand pensions can work differently depending upon how you opt them, where you might get less money in the pension, but you still get it. Like if your spouse dies, say, I
Mm.
still get that spouse's pension. You may not get the full pension that they would have gotten were they alive, but if that person dies, you can still collect on that pension. Is
Yes,
that
I
your
think
understanding?
that takes us back to what do you do in advance to
Right.
make sure you're set. So when anyone's looking to take a pension election, they should of course consider it very carefully and talk to an advisor. And when we have
Mhm,
clients that are ready to take their election, we go through their options,
mhm,
and they're usually options where there's a 50% survivor benefit or a
mhm,
75% survivor benefit. And we go
mhm,
through the scenarios of what it would look like
mhm,
for a surviving spouse. And it's very important to be clear on what you're doing up front to make sure that it would work down the line
mhm.
when someone passes.
So that's a good preventative medicine.
It is.
But what happens when they didn't make that election,
Mhm.
and you're dealing with, they paid into this pension, they may have died before retirement. So usually, as I
Mhm.
understand it, you make that election before you retire and officially go on to the pension. But what if this happens, you don't get around to that because they die earlier or you didn't make the election? How does that widow access that pension?
So this would be part of our inventory process.
Mhm,
We put that pension on their list of things to do, places to call. And,
mhm,
I've spent many hours on the phone with my widowed clients, just helping them get through their phone calls. And you
mhm,
just have to, every pension program handles it differently, but you just have to get them on the phone and you get your list of options. And there's usually paperwork involved,
mhm,
and there is some sort of benefit to claim.
mhm.
And, you take that information and work it into their overall financial plan, their cash flow, once you find out what that amount is going to be.
Okay. All right. So we've talked about assets and mortgages and things like that, and we've talked
Mhm.
about retirement accounts. Is there anything else that you deal with widowed women that they need to address upon the death of their spouse?
So one item is just finding out what their fears are, what their concerns are,
Mhm,
because a lot of times they're just very scared. They don't know, what is my life going to look like? Am I going to be able to afford to maintain my lifestyle? So one of the really important things we do once we triage everything is we talk about, what do you want life to look like?
mhm,
And then we look at the facts. We look at how much money there is, and we
mhm,
determine what is and is not realistic.
mhm,
And we help them come up with a plan for going forward so that they can, at least alleviate some of those financial fears
mhm.
so that they can focus on themselves and going through the healing process.
Right. Okay. Well, that takes care of our the widowed women. Uh,
Mhm.
Now, obviously, a divorced woman can face some similar challenges, but often
Mhm.
different ones as well because the spouse is still around. And that can also
Mhm.
complicate things when you still have minor children.
Of course.
So, walk us through what oftentimes divorced women have to face and the financial planning they have to do either during the divorce or once the divorce is final.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the first steps is just getting really familiar with what their divorce decree states and
Hmm.
what the arrangements are. If there's alimony, how long are we going to have that for?
Hmm.
And who's in charge for paying for education, childcare, and how much.
Hmm.
And we really take all that information plus whatever information we have on, if they're working, and we like to build out a cash flow model just to see how things look, because
Hmm.
with a divorce, typically, your alimony is running for a set number of years.
Hmm.
So you need to sort of plan short term and then midterm for once that alimony runs out. And then you
Hmm.
need to look further on into that plan, 10, 20 years out. What does retirement look like? So I feel
Hmm.
like we have a lot more phases and different sort of income structures and phases to go through when someone's gone through a divorce.
Yeah. Well, you're from stream of income. You mentioned alimony, and of course, it varies from state to state depending upon the laws, and
Mhm.
B, I'm not a family law attorney, but I also understand that alimony is often not awarded in probably the majority of cases, at least in New Jersey, especially now with working
Mhm.
women and things like that. And if it is awarded at all, in many cases, isn't permanent. Referred to as what's called rehabilitative alimony, where,
Mhm.
all right, you have this amount of time to get back on your feet, to get a job, your own stream of income,
Mhm.
and in the meantime, you're going to have this alimony. So, yes, you're dealing with alimony as a factor, but of course, if that isn't there, then you need to look for alternative forms of income, right? And other
Well, yeah,
ways
then
of
we need
turning it
to we
around.
need to look into how much does she need to make to maintain her lifestyle?
Mhm,
And, is she willing to do that, or is she willing to make compromises? So,
mhm,
when there's not the income there, we have to go to some of the tougher decisions
mhm,
and see if there are enough assets to live off on,
mhm,
or if we need to look at going back to work or looking for a higher paying job.
mhm. And we were talking before we started recording about um, college funds, or what are called either educational IRAs or 529 funds after that section of the
Mhm.
Internal Revenue Code. So where you have a family and you have the husband and wife, the father and mother all living together, and all sort of on the same page, hopefully, as far as educational planning. When you've got they're now divorced, and often they will remarry, and now there are other spouses and everything else, staying on track for the planning and financing of the education of the child from that marriage. So that
Mhm.
separation, that divorce can, I would think, present some challenges as far as planning and maintaining that financial plan, right?
Definitely, definitely. So if, clients indicate to us they're about to go through a divorce and we're able to catch them in that preventative medicine phase,
Mm-hmm.
we always make sure that they, focus with their divorce attorney on the education arrangement, just to
Mm-hmm.
make sure, even if it doesn't end up being the way they want it, that they're at least aware and they've tried to reach some kind of equitable decision. And once a divorce is finalized and we
Mm-hmm.
know how much our client needs to save
Mm-hmm.
for education, we typically will have them start a monthly savings plan,
Mm-hmm.
investing in their 529 if they're able to, just because that way it's automated. There aren't going to be any surprises at the end, and
Mm-hmm.
it helps you get prepared in advance. So I think the preventative medicine with the educational planning is really the best way to go.
Okay. So we covered sort of replacing income streams,
Mhm.
and also the education of the child. As far as replacing income streams, do you have particular tools in your toolbox when helping divorced women in this regard?
Sure. So for women who are looking to replace income streams, if they have assets,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many types of annuities out there
Mm-hmm.
that can provide guaranteed income streams. So if we have someone that's nervous, that doesn't want to rely on the stock market to grow their assets
Mm-hmm.
and pay them whatever they're going to pay later, we will look at annuities with living benefit guarantees, and they're very complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But we've found that a lot of divorced and widowed women take comfort in that,
Mm-hmm.
either as an income, guaranteed income replacement, or a complement to a pension that they're receiving benefits from.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now we've anything else besides the replace? We talked about, like I said, the replacement of income and the planning for the education of minor children, if there are,
Mhm.
at the time of the divorce. Are there any other financial planning issues that you found divorced women need to address?
I don't know if I'd call it an issue, but in addition to just sort of the facts and the things that one must take care of, we
Hmm.
also really like to explore the human side of it and
Hmm.
look at their lifestyle. Do you want to travel more? Are there hobbies that you want to take up? Do you want to change your career? So we look at those sorts of things because I'm not just interested in making sure someone's balance sheet is shored up. I want to make sure that they're enjoying their life.
Hmm.
So life enjoyment is definitely part of the financial planning agenda.
Okay. All right. We've covered this a little bit in discussion, but looking at it from a different axis of whether it's divorced women or widowed women, uh, how does the advice change or the issues change with age? As women, whether they're younger or older, does that change the picture or the advice that you give on what they need to do upon the death or divorce with a spouse?
Mhm. It sure does. So let's just say once a woman gets into her 60s, late
Hmm.
50s, early 60s, we have to start looking at Social Security
Hmm.
options. Once you hit 65, we need to start looking at Medicare. And the Social Security is a particularly big decision because widows can start taking survivor benefits at age 60.
Hmm.
And we have to look at whether or not it makes sense to do so. If she's still working and earning a substantial income, she may not want to take the Social Security early because there's something called the earnings test, where if you
Hmm.
make over a certain amount of money, the Social Security Administration is going to pull back some of your benefit.
Hmm.
So, we look at all the facts there. With divorced women, as long as they have not, there are instances where they are able to draw Social Security off of their ex-spouse's record.
Hmm.
And these are all scenarios where we typically start with having our clients set up a meeting with Social Security. Now I think with the pandemic, they're still mostly by phone, but
Hmm.
it's important to always start with a phone call to get the facts, just because the website is not going to have information on your survivor benefit or
Hmm.
what you may be eligible to collect off of an
Hmm.
ex-spouse. So we spend a lot of time fact gathering on Social Security and then going through the process of planning when it might make sense to start
Hmm.
drawing Social Security.
Right. So that's Social Security, but also as you get older and things like that, are there any Medicare issues that you need to deal with?
Yes. So for Medicare, Medicare is very complicated, and I encourage you to have a Medicare broker on sometime just to be an expert speaker because it's a very interesting topic.
Hmm.
But when you turn 65, you need to enroll, and if you don't enroll on time, you can be subject to penalties. So if let's say that you were eligible for Medicare at 65, you weren't on any employer covered insurance, so you had no reason to delay. If you waited till you were 67, 68 to enroll in your Part B, then you would be paying much higher rates than if you had enrolled at 65.
Hmm.
And it's very important to find someone, a trusted Medicare person, to take you through the process of signing up.
Hmm.
And one thing that you need to watch out for is your income level. So your Part B and D premiums,
Hmm.
if you're doing Part B and D, and just for everyone on the call, Part B is your Medicare insurance that covers your doctor's visits and such.
Hmm.
And Part D covers your prescriptions.
Hmm.
Your Part A is your hospital insurance, and that's what you pay into while you're working. But your Part B and D, that's what you're going to pay your premium for. And it comes out of your Social Security check if you're
Hmm.
drawing at the time.
Hmm.
And if you're earning over certain amounts of money, there's brackets of income that you can pull on Medicare.gov. They will
Hmm.
increase your Part B and D premiums.
Hmm.
So we like to look at our clients' tax returns every year get an idea for what bracket they're in. And if they're going to get close to moving up to the next bracket and increase their Medicare premium, then it's good to have a conversation with their CPA, see if there's anything we can do with tax credits, whatnot, to keep them in their bracket.
Okay. So that's Social Security and that's Medicare. Are there any other issues that women face as they get older and find themselves
Yes.
widowed or divorced?
Yeah, so I think we're going to go back to our preventative medicine that we've talked about so many times during our conversation. But earlier on, we like to discuss long-term care. Does someone have enough assets to self-insure? Do they think that they have enough to feasibly pay for long-term care facilities or in-home care? Or do they need to buy some sort of insurance vehicle to help pay for that? So that's something that we try to address with clients in their 50s or 60s to determine if they need an insurance product.
Okay. Anything else that older women face when they're widowed or divorced? Or we covered everything?
I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think we've covered most of it.
Okay. So I guess the next question is, you've in your practice and what you do, you have been focusing on women and the issues that they face when widowed or divorced. Is there a particular reason you went in that direction? In other words, are there challenges that women have in these situations that men don't, or how do those issues differ for women as opposed to men?
I think this is a great topic to discuss. So I think that the reason why I've had so many widowed women come to me is because these women were in scenarios where they just weren't in charge of the finances. And there are just still a lot of marriages out there that are very traditional and the man handles the finances. So I think that I'm theorizing that the reason why I don't get very many male widowers is because most of them feel equipped to handle things because they had been handling it already. I do think that there is merit in men participating in financial planning by themselves. And not to stereotype, but I think just with a lot of the people we work with, the men were primarily in charge of the assets, and it's not that way for everyone. It's just the people that need the help the most are the ones that are coming to me proactively.
Right. All right. And also we were talking about Social Security and retirement issues, which are somewhat different for the younger divorcee or widow, because they may well remarry. That changes the situation. But there's a lot of talk these days about how much we can really rely on Social Security to take care of ourselves, take care of us in our retirement, and even some talk that Social Security Administration may not be able to pay the full benefit you're entitled to past, I think it was 2030. So what advice do you give to people as a financial planner with regard to retirement, and how significantly Social Security should factor into that?
So we do factor in the Social Security, and some clients are more worried about the solvency of Social Security than others. And we always like to make sure that there are other buckets to draw income from. But my opinion on Social Security and what's going to happen to it going forward in the future is we have to sort of look at who's in charge. And it doesn't matter what your politics are. I think we can all agree on the fact that these politicians like to get reelected. And I don't think a politician would want to be the one in charge of standing up in front of Congress and telling Congress and the whole country, like, hey, we're out of money. We're giving you a pay cut, because those people aren't going to get reelected. So I'm inclined to think that some action will be taken in the future to protect Social Security. I don't know what it is. It may come down to the 11th hour. It will likely involve paying more taxes. I don't know who will pay those taxes, but I'm inclined to think that some action will be taken at
Mhm.
some point.
Because there's often been talk about, and it's a hot button thing too. You're right about being reelected, where some
Mhm.
politicians are getting, well, we may need to cut back on Social Security entitlements,
Mhm.
which always annoys me because I'm like, it's not an entitlement. It's something that we've paid into.
Mhm.
And the reason why there isn't money, as much money in Social Security in the trust fund, is because you borrowed against it.
Mhm.
So really to say we need to cut back on Social Security entitlements means, well, we're going to renege on a debt to the American people by not
Mhm.
paying back that money.
And
So I
that
think you're
would not
right.
go over well.
No, that will not. So I think that you're right. It's a tough political position to take, to uh, certainly to cut back on entitlements. But what do you do? Because if the money just isn't there, whether
Mhm.
you cut back on them or not, you've got to do something. You've got to pay it back. You've got to put the money in, because
Mhm.
Social Security started out, of course, as a pay it forward situation, until it could get enough, get legs under it to grow on its own and to help people.
Mhm.
But yeah, you gotta put the money back. All right,
Mhm.
so I think we covered everything on what women need to do if they find themselves widowed or divorced. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or um, bring up?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
Mhm,
And, I just wanted to, at the close of our conversation here, just encourage people to reach out to a financial planner. And you
mhm,
don't necessarily have to wait for this big life event to
mhm,
happen. Really lean into that preventative medicine and talk to an advisor
mhm,
before something happens. That way you have a plan and you have a relationship with someone that can help walk you through a potentially difficult time.
mhm. And if people want to reach out to you,
Yeah, so if
how
people
can they
want
do that? How can they, if they say, you know what, this is very interesting, and and I want to get some preventative medicine, or I find myself in this situation, and I need help. How do they reach out to you?
well, I would love to hear from any of your listeners, and you can find me and my contact information at our firm's website, which is www.bedenwealth.com. So that's B as in boy, EDEN wealth.com. And I'd love to hear from anyone.
Okay. And for the listeners out there, I'll also put all the contact information in the show notes for the episode, so that if you're driving in your car and you're listening to this, and don't go writing it down while you're driving, just look up the show notes and they'll all be right there. And you can reach out to Maryann for help if you need it in this area or some advice. So thanks for coming on the show, Maryann. There's a lot I see from your website that you do. So we may well have you back to talk about some other issues.
Great. Thanks for having me, Steve.
It's good to have you on.